On August 12th, we are going to be experiencing a total solar eclipse in the sign of Leo. This eclipse is going to be bringing with it themes of releasing outdated notions of the ways in which we relate to ourselves, the ways in which we assign value to things, to people, to ideas. It carries with it a very distinct future oriented vibe, a very strong sense that the old paradigms of the past, the old conditioning, the old belief systems are simply no longer cutting it. And it is time to shed our skin as we move boldly into the future, into a more alchemized version of ourselves. So let's do the deep dive. Let's unpack this chart so you have an idea of just what to expect as we head into this eclipse. Okay, so this is the chart for the eclipse that's going to be happening in Leo on August 12th. So we are going to be getting this eclipse. Now, what I'm sure is the first thing you've noticed is that we have this very interesting formation. I don't know what we would call this. I'm sure there is a name for it, but as we can see, everybody was talking about the barbalt basket, right? But now we've got this whole other dimension to it. So I'm going to call this like, I don't know, a barbalt castle maybe. But anyways, it's actually, there's a lot going on here. And so we're going to unpack this. But basically what we've been seeing for the past couple of weeks has been this minor grand trine with Neptune in Aries, Pluto in Aquarius, Uranus in Gemini, Uranus, Neptune, Pluto, Neptune in the 60-degree sextile aspect with Uranus in a trine with Pluto. Now, this is all flowing energy. And so we have this ongoing discourse between these planets that are all outer planets. They all, on some level, speak to the collective consciousness, and they also speak to us on a more soul level. Now, what we see during this eclipse is that two other planets have joined this conversation, and those are Mercury and Venus. Now, what makes this so special is that Venus and Mercury are considered personal planets. Mercury is all about our communication, how we communicate. It's also about how we process information. You know, the moon is all about our emotions, our emotional landscape. Mercury is our mental landscape. It is the way we process things, the way we communicate with others, the way we receive communication. You know, Venus is in pop astrology all about love, romance, relationships, money. It's, you know, but that's very reductive. Venus is about so much more than that. Venus, on a more fundamental level, is about our values, about what is it that is important to us. What do we assign values to, right? And of course, money is going to be a part of that equation because money represents value. But so these planets are called personal planets because where they appear in our chart fundamentally shapes the way we express ourselves in terms of values, in terms of our thoughts and communication. So with these planets joining this conversation, this discourse with the outer planets, we are seeing a lot of things happening. And without just generally speaking to this overall, I want to look at some of these aspects. We're going to break it down. Basically, let's reverse engineer it and then build it back up and see if we can get a sense of what is going on. But before we get into those individual aspects, I need to point out that these are all occurring in fire and air signs. Every single fire and air sign is triggered here, with the exception of Sagittarius, which is empty. That does not mean that Sagittarius, if you've got Sagittarius placements, especially early degrees, that they're not going to get heavily lit up by this energy, because trust me, they will. But what this means is that air and fire are considered diurnal, daytime. We call them masculine signs. It's not quite synonymous with modern day interpretations of masculine and feminine, but they're considered more with kind of bold, assertive action. It's active energy. And when we see all of this fire and air, if you think about it, what does fire and air do? Well, air fuels fire, right? It helps fire grow. And for example, if you light a candle, it's consuming oxygen. And we know that because if you put a lid back on the candle with the flame still burning, it's going to go out. Wildfires, for example. What makes wildfires grow? The wind. What we see, these elements are setting the tone for this eclipse, which is also occurring in the fire sign of Leo. So it's going to be expressed through primarily these two elements. But let's start with Mercury. What is Mercury in Leo? Well, as we said, Mercury is the sign of communication, thought process. Leo is big, bold. It is center stage. So when we think about Mercury in Leo, and Leo is also about courage. It's about warmth. It's about bravery. It's about facing adversity boldly. And we see that this big X here, these are the two, really the only two challenging aspects. But this rectangle by itself, right, putting this triangle aside, this is what's known as a mystic rectangle. I actually kind of like the term, but it's basically two planets in opposition that are trining one planet and sextiling another planet, and it's all the four same planets. So what this means, then, there's going to be some opposition, no doubt about it, but it is the planets that are in this opposition are being supported by the same planets that are supporting their opposite planet. So when you see one of these aspects, especially in a natal chart, I actually like this even better than, for example, a grand trine, which we also have. But when you just have flowing aspects, sometimes it's like life can be on easy mode, but it can also really discourage growth in a lot of ways. Here you have this really nice balance of oppositional tension, but like support. It's like you feel empowered and okay with the opposition because you are being supported. There, it's like you've got somebody in your corner. You've got a team really in your corner who is helping you up that mountain, and even your opposition is indirectly cooperating in that. These planets are pushing each other to accomplish more. So this is actually one of my favorite aspects. But then, you add to that a third planet, right? So for each of these two oppositions, and this goes for all five of these planets, Pluto, Neptune, Uranus, Mercury, and Venus. Mercury and Venus are in opposition to Neptune and Pluto, but they're each getting, for this one opposition, they're getting three supportive aspects. Both of them are 1, 2, 3. And so what we see here is like this energy is just very supportive. It's just the geometry of what's going on. This is not being rosy. It's not about being pie in the sky sort of optimistic without, in an unwarranted sort of way. But I think it's important to break it down and see what each of these aspects is really saying. So let's start with a sextile to Mercury from Uranus. So this could represent new insights. with this aspect, there's an openness to new ideas. There's an openness to letting energy in a way that we may not have been as receptive to. Mercury has just come out of a retrograde cycle in Cancer. So for many, there's been a review period in the Cancer part of your life based on your natal chart. And for many, there has been a lot of review, a lot of revision. And now Mercury is now in this very sunny sign of Leo. And, depending on how that retrograde goes, like Uranus is here being like, hey, nice to see you again. What'd you learn? What can I send your way to help you, move forward after that retrograde cycle? And we're more open to it now, especially with that sextile. So I wish I was better about journaling. I try to do it, but my ADHD brain is not good at being consistent. But I wish I at least like keeping a journal, because going back when you look at like the transits that were going on at the time, it's like, wow, there's like tremendous insights. But I would suggest, and I do plan to write down, anything that I get around this period, because I think it's going to be really insightful. Because, sometimes we'll just have these things that pop into our head where it's like, wow, like the light bulb moment. It's like light bulbs are definitely going to be going off just from the sextile alone. Never mind what all this other stuff happening. So, but if we don't write it down, for me, it's like, I would like to think I just like retain everything in my head, but I definitely don't. So if you're one of those people, definitely just like maybe not a mental note if you're going to forget, but make a note, write it down so you don't forget it. Because this is just energy that is here for the taking, and we can take it, but if we forget it, then it's kind of going out the window anyway. So this is a period where these sorts of things could happen. Uranus is an awakening energy in many ways. It can shake you up. It can shake you out of a trance in a real effective way sometimes. So I love seeing that. We also have this trine to Neptune, and Neptune is an expansionary energy. It's similar to Jupiter in this way, but I would say even more so than Jupiter. And the reason why is that the outer planets are outside the bounds of Saturn. They exist outside the realm of Saturn. And as I said in one of my prior videos, Saturn, it was considered until the discovery of the outer planets as the bounds of material reality. And so these planets, all three of them, are outside of that boundary. Jupiter is not. So in some ways, as an interpretive principle, we can say that Jupiter represents expansion to an extent, but while Jupiter is contained within the bounds of Saturn, Neptune goes even further out into the space of beyond, right? But we don't know what that is, right? It's not defined. So on one hand, because there's potentially limitless expansion here, it can be exceptionally inspirational. It can allow you to think on a big level, to draw into farther reaches, to see horizons that are farther than you've ever seen before. Neptune is often maligned in astrology, and I'll admit, I find Neptune to be challenging. If you've ever, for example, gone through a period of profound disillusionment in your life, this planet probably had something to do with it, but that doesn't mean that it is a categorically negative planet. And so I'm talking about the sort of higher manifestation of Neptune, especially in Aries, which is a sign of wanting to go boldly forward. Where Neptune excels is that it allows you to see the possibilities. Sometimes those possibilities end up just being an illusion, right? Not all of our dreams come true, but for those of us who have stopped dreaming to begin with, Neptune can be very effective. And there is a challenge about sort of getting a little bit too lofty in certain goals, but at some point, Saturn or Mars is going to pop some bubbles with Neptune. But what it can do, what makes Neptune special, is that it can allow us to see the highest possibilities of things. And sometimes we can, in fact, bring that into our reality, but we can never even bring a fraction of it in if we can't see it to begin with. So we've got that going on. But between these two planets, I see a lot of higher insights, a lot of hope, a lot of forward movement coming into our conscious awareness, because and becoming, integrated with our, like, it's being brought up. It's not just something that is existing on an unconscious level, or it's a potential of unlock. There's a potential to unlock a lot of insights, whether you want to call them downloads, divine guidance, whatever term you want to use. I see this as being very, very good. We have the opposition from Pluto. So Mercury, again, thinking logical side, Pluto represents a lot of things, but it represents attachments, depth, areas where opposing forces, because it's opposition, but this also speaks to power dynamics. There's a depth to Pluto that is really unmatched by other planets. This can be internal or external. A lot of times this can manifest as being completely internal, and I'll explain what it means in a second. But we also have the sextile from Venus, right? And Venus and Mercury are friends. They get along well, but Venus again speaks to our thinking, communication, processing. Venus is about our values. And so what we're seeing here, just looking at these aspects, when we put it all together, just from Mercury alone, I think what we're seeing here is, if you've been feeling stuck in a certain part of your life, or even just in general, what this is going to do, if you're receptive and open for new growth, for new ways of expansion, this is going to allow you to see the higher possibilities. It's going to allow you to see, in what areas of my life have I gotten myself bogged down? What is no longer serving me? What have I grown? What is making me tired and exhausted and weary? What do I want for myself? What do I want for my future? And you may not even know what it is, but you'll most likely, if you don't know, you're going to get some insight. The final question, and for some of us, for some, you may know exactly what it is, what you want, but if you're feeling some sort of resistance from Pluto, you're most likely to get some insight into, okay, how do I overcome these roadblocks? How do I, that question is likely to, you're going to get some insights. Whether it's just new ideas, like, I need to reassess X, Y, Z. There's likely going to be incredible opportunities for forward movement here. Now, Venus is bringing into focus what is important to us. Venus is about, again, our values, the things that are important, the things that we assign value to, whether it is the things we want to accomplish, the people in our life, the experiences we have, the ideas of what makes us happy, the ideas of what makes us fulfilled, the ideas of what makes us feel safe, are all going to be, the Venus is interacting with all of these planets, and Venus is getting a trine from Uranus. So here, for a lot of people, so first of all, Venus has now left a pretty daunting journey through Virgo, and it's not just because she is debilitated in Virgo, but earlier, at the end of July, she was under a superior square from Mars. And because of the speed of both of those planets, that lasted for a decent amount of time. So Venus has now completed that kind of rough patch and has now entered her diurnal air domicile of Libra. So again, this is like a fresh air. Both of these planets, Mercury and Venus, have come through some challenging periods, different, that looked very different, but they're now in much more, I would say, comfortable positions here. And they're getting all of these new insights from these other planets. So this trine from Uranus, this is the best way I can explain this is like Venus is the things that made me happy, the things that I thought were important. I want to seek out new experiences, new opportunities. There's a sense of something in the Venusian realm is just not cutting it. It's just not doing it for her anymore. She wants something new because she's tired of the old. And so our values themselves are most likely going to be going through a period of metamorphosis. Uranus is very inspirational in its own way. Uranus is out of the box. It can be quirky. It can be unconventional, right? Conventional XYZ is not going to cut it for this Venus right now. And a lot of us are going to feel that. It's just not cutting it. Now, this opposition from Neptune is further challenging the limits of how we assign values to things. Are we too restricted? Are we thinking too small? Because this opposition, Neptune is pulling, she's pushing Venus to think bigger, to expand her horizon. So really, these two aspects are accomplishing a lot of the same things in slightly different ways. But Venus is allowing, or Neptune is showing Venus the ways in which her ideals, is she thinking high enough? Is she thinking big enough? Now, maybe she is, right? We always have to be careful with Neptune because Neptune is about expansion, but it can also be rose-colored glasses, right? So it's about balancing it with a healthy level of optimism while also not just disregarding what this energy is trying to say. Because I think that would be a major disservice to ourselves to ignore any insights we get about ways in which we can expand and we can see the higher, because fundamentally that's what we want. If our values, the things that are important have not led to a life being fulfilling in some ways, well, then maybe we need to look at what's important in a different way. And then finally, the trine from Pluto. It's adding a level of intensity and depth to it. And it's also speaking to a need to transform in some ways, but it's a trine aspect. So Pluto is playing nicer with Venus. And some of the words that just come to mind: inspiration, the ability to see a higher level of existence for ourselves, an intolerance for those things that have not been serving us in the past, whether they be things, people, places, situations, jobs. Like tolerance for conventions, for norms, is at an all-time low. And I think that, this is something that a lot of us have been experiencing to some degree for a while now. At least for me and a lot of people that I've spoken to, there is an increasing awareness on a collective level. And I'm not just talking about like the spiritual community, right? I think that there is an increasing awareness, awakening the norms, values, conventional ideas of what it means to be successful, to be happy, to be fulfilled, what we have been conditioned to believe is bullshit. And I'm going to say that unapologetically because we are increasingly seeing that the world is set up to benefit certain people to the exclusion of the vast majority of everyone else. And we've been caught on these pendulums of division, on these pendulums of divisiveness that have really pulled the wool over our eyes in a lot of ways, right? And I'm not going to get too much onto the collective in this video because I think that it's just as important, if not more, that we are integrating these energies on an individual level, because that's where it starts. In this world, you cannot help but feel, at least for me, a huge sense of disillusionment about the things that I was taught, conditioned to believe would lead to happiness, because they just don't. They just don't. And at least in my life. And of course, I have undergone some heavy outer planet transits. So, that has brought those things to the surface. But I think what we're seeing is that our upbringing, part of it is, but it's not just like, it isn't just your family, right? Because your family was likely, was conditioned to believe the same thing. And now we see the mask is slipping. It's slipping in a big way here. And now what has been going on with these outer planets is it's being brought down to earth in a way that it really hasn't before. And so, of course, this isn't comfortable, and a lot of, and this isn't going to be great for a lot of people because, again, not everybody is attuned to these energies. And if you're resistant and if you would much rather just have the wool kept over your eyes, and a lot of people do, and they shouldn't be judged because they're all on their own journey. But these are the energies of the times we are living in. And to some extent, so much of how things go depends on how receptive we are. Are we hearing the cosmic messages that are being sent? And are we willing to be open-minded and curious about what we want for ourselves, about what we can allow ourselves to have, what we can allow ourselves to experience? This is really encouraging people to think higher in ways that they haven't before. And yes, there's going to be uncomfortable aspects, and it's not going to be easy. But if you pay attention, you will see the path illuminated, and you will see the ways in which those obstacles that you perceive to be in front of you, whether it be something that is internalized, conditioned beliefs about what we deserve and what we don't deserve, or what we can do, or about what actually makes us happy versus what should make us happy. A spotlight will be shown on that. And so paying attention during this time can really, truly shine a light and provide the catalyst for tremendous growth. Now, I've said all of that, and I haven't even gotten into the eclipse itself. So what we are seeing here is the eclipse is really not aspecting anything. And I kind of like that because we don't have any. So we actually have Saturn and Mars and the eclipse, right? This new moon is really not aspecting anything. So this eclipse is not under stress from either of the malefic planets, Saturn and Mars, but it is still being infused with this flow of energy because we have all these planets that are co-present in Leo. And so we do see that, this eclipse is going to have a flavor of shining a light. And this is the sign of the sun. So the sun is well dignified during this eclipse. Again, it's a south node eclipse. As I said before, it's going to require us to shed there's going to be a need to shed old, outdated versions of ourselves, because Leo and the sun both speak to the self. And it's up to us whether we are going to hold on to those things that no longer serve us, or we're going to keep our head in the sand, or we're going to rise to the occasion and see the ways in which we can make our life more vibrant, more fulfilling, more rewarding in ways that maybe we never even thought was possible before. I think that is really the big overarching message here. And we have this inflow of energy that is occurring in Aquarius. And this is, Aquarius is about humanity. It's about the collective. It is about the compassion that we have for others as a group, and realizing that we are not all that different from each other, and maybe some of the conditioning that we've been afflicted with has had a lot to do with the illusion that we are more divided than we actually are. I think that is one theme that during this next year and a half of the North Node and Pluto, which will eventually converge in Aquarius, is going to be speaking to. We're going to see who the real problem is, and it's not going to be each other, we'll just say. And I think many of us are starting to see quite clearly what the problem is. And again, I'm not going to really get into it in this video. I might in a later one, but I think most of you know exactly what I'm talking about. And, beyond that, this is obviously going to be felt by any placements within the first 8 degrees or so of the fire and air signs. But really, if you've got early placements in any of the signs, you're going to be feeling these energies. Now, if you've got earth and water placements, it's going to feel a little bit more tense. Anything, just any insights we get, any circumstances that arise during this period of time, approach it with curiosity and don't just dismiss it outright because it isn't fitting into the mold of what you think is resonant. And I think that for a lot of people, because there's so much planetary support, it's not going to be likely for a lot of people to feel that way. It may be overwhelming, right? It may be a little bit much to deal with, but I think that on a personal level, it's going to be, like, to me, I see this as exciting. There's a lot of excitement here, and ultimately, that's a really good thing. Of course, we do have Mars. Mars has just entered Cancer, and he is debilitated in Cancer, and Mars has the capacity to wreak havoc. So could he provide some sort of resistance? Depending, there could be, but Mars is also about drive and ambition and all of that. So it's going to be very specific, but Mars is not really the planet that is one I would be super concerned about. We do have this Saturn retrograde through Aries, which, I think it's a good thing, and it falls in line with the theme of this eclipse, which is about shedding. Saturn has just gone retrograde, and Saturn retrograde, Saturn is a planet of karma. And when we talk about karma, a lot of what we're talking about is unbalanced energy, which is what the South Node is also. I mean, the nodal axis is karmic, and we're not talking about karmic retribution. Can it manifest that way? Of course, but it's not meant to be a punishment. It is a rebalancing of energy in order to propel us into new levels of growth. That's just something to keep in mind. But Saturn can feel sometimes like we have it can feel like extra weight, but with Saturn retrograde, it is asking us to slow down. And so there may be themes of needing to slow down in order to, again, take a step back in order to hear what is being offered. If we feel like we've been spinning our wheels, Saturn is saying, hey, you got to slow down because you're making things too hard, right? Work smarter, not harder sometimes, because Aries wants to rush through things. And just as a sign, I'm not saying every Aries, I'm just saying that Aries is cardinal fire, and there is a tendency to want to rush, but is there a better way of doing things? So again, that is, those are just other sub themes to keep an eye out for. But overall, I think this is going to be, I normally, with a South Node eclipse, I'm not as optimistic, but I think that as much release as we are willing to accommodate, there's so much flowing energy coming in, including and from Aquarius, where the North Node is, that I think that it's almost, and I don't want to say it's almost like it's a North Node eclipse instead, because that's not accurate. There's still going to be some release, but I think that it's like, if we feel the need to release, it's going to feel so much easier because we can see what lies ahead. This is a very forward focused, future focused dynamic that is going on. It is focused on the future. It is not, and of course, it doesn't mean that it's going to be easy to let go of certain things from the past, whether it be outdated ideas, whether it be outdated people, and I shouldn't say outdated people, but people that don't resonate with the path that we are on. Outdated ways of relating to ourselves. Outdated ideas of importance. We're getting a direct interface with these three very spiritual outer planets that allow us to see bigger, brighter, better ways of existing in the world. And they allow us to see in a more expanded way how we can significantly improve aspects of our life that have gone, again, it's not going to be the same for everybody. It's going to manifest very differently because we all have different ways of processing things. But there is going to be a major tone shift, I think. And this is when we're really going to feel it. So I think I'm going to leave it at that. I don't want to focus so much on the negativity. I really don't. And, I think it's interestingly, as an astrologer, to look at patterns and see how they influence the world. But, we did see that earthquake in Japan, which is tragic, very unfortunate. Eclipses and fixed signs can do that. We also are, there is a potential for upcoming financial issues. The reason why financial issues can come up is the last time the South Node was in Leo was in 2008. And Leo is not a sign that is commonly associated with finances per se. I guess in a way it is, but it's more importantly, it squares Taurus and Scorpio, which are both signs that are related to the financial sector. And so does this mean that there's going to be a great recession? No, it's not the same planetary setup. This is very different, but I think that financial issues could be a theme in the next couple of months. This is a fixed eclipse. And so eclipses and fixed signs have the potential to last months, meaning that this becomes a sensitive point. And when other planets aspect it, it's going to potentially trigger a significant event. Again, good or bad. But, I think that's most of what I wanted to talk about here. And just one final thought, I guess, that I did not mention in the chart analysis, but is very relevant is, one of the major themes that we've all been seeing play out over the course of the past couple of years is AI and the proliferation of AI and this really mad dash to develop it without very much apparent regard for regulation, for the consequences. There's a sort of cavalier attitude towards it that is, I think one of those tech guys was like, well, we'll just, deal with whatever comes up if and when it comes up. It's like, okay, interesting perspective, but one of the real problems is, as you saw with the chart analysis, lots of trines flowing energy, which on a personal level in your birth chart, even mostly with transits, they can be quite positive. But when it comes to, a very complicated topic like AI, I can't help but look at all of those trines and sextiles and wonder if that is basically fueling the fire, facilitating even more, getting the ball rolling downhill in a very sort of accelerated way. And is that a good thing? Again, it's when we're talking about global mundane astrology, you have to ask the question, good for who? Because any significant global event, I would actually argue almost any event, barring something that is absolutely catastrophic, is going to be good for some people and bad for others. For example, wildfires, horrible, absolutely horrible, but who benefits, right? We know who benefited in Hawaii, for example. Developers benefited. So the planets are not necessarily going to reflect our personal ideas of what's good and bad when we are looking at it in the context of global astrology. And so that's when it gets really tricky. And I don't mean this to be negative, but I do think that while on a personal level, on a spiritual level, when I see this flowing energy, there's a lot there to work with, to progress as an individual. And we can also say that on a global level, it may not be all positive. And that's unfortunately just the nature of reality. And I think it's important to point that out. And with going back to AI, it's like these trines and sextiles, yeah, they're good for pushing that forward. But is that a good thing for us as individuals? I guess it depends on your perspective. I know I've got mine. And let's just say I'm a bit more skeptical, to put it mildly. But anyway, so those are my thoughts on this upcoming eclipse. If you found this video helpful, informative, insightful, please consider liking, commenting, subscribing. This is still a very new channel, so that kind of support really helps. And also, if you're interested in the effects of eclipses in general, check out my video that I did specifically on eclipses and why they are so impactful from an astrological perspective. I think it will really help put some of this discussion into context. That's pretty much all I had, so we will catch you on the next video. Take care.